Nächsten Programmpunkt.
Welcome to the next order of business. The journalist Carolin Emcke is traveling with her new book, Was wahr ist, what is true. And today she will be meeting Claudia Kemfert to talk about violence and truth during the climate crisis. It will be presented by Jonas Scheible, and I hope you will be well informed during this next hour.
Ja, hallo.
Hello, great that you're all here. Welcome to this talk, which seems to be filled down to the last place. We have 60 intensive minutes ahead of us. We want to think about what is true. If it should turn out to become more vivid, and if there should be a debate, I'm not going to prevent that. We want to talk about the climate crisis and how to talk about it while keeping people in mind. Carolin Emcke has been thinking about this for a long time. She's written various books about being witnesses, about bearing witness, and now she has written a book that has the same title as this talk, Was wahr ist, what is true, and therefore it only makes sense that she's up on stage here. Carolin Emcke is a journalist and author and philosopher. She reported from war zones for a long time. She is a podcaster. She has won a lot of prizes, among them the German the Peace Prize of the German Publishing. Claudia Kemfert has been thinking about these things for a long while as well. She explains the climate crisis in interviews, in news articles, in podcasts. She is an economist and professor of energy economics and is head of a department at the German Institute for Economics. Welcome, Claudia Kemfert. And I would like to start with you, Ms. Kemfert, and play a little game or a thought experiment that I took from Ms. Emcke's book. And I would like to know which of these mythical animals, the unicorn or the kobold, might really exist, and which would be more likely to exist. And please explain your reasoning. And to give you some more seconds to think about this, the book contains 10 mythical animals, but the unicorn or the goblin. The goblin exists, I'm sure. It reminds me of a trip I took to Iceland, where people told me that these mythical creatures existed, and there's even an official in charge of these mythical animals, and these elves live there, and next to these elves there are also goblins, and the goblins, I was told, they are visible. Personally, I didn't see them directly, but according to the description I was giving, I was able to imagine what they would look like. And on my way back, after the trip, when I was traveling back to the airport, there were lots of plush animals that were supposed to look like goblins, and I immediately remembered that, and I thought, okay, I've seen one, at least in my imagination. They exist in Iceland, make themselves comfortable. And I remember this because we looked at waterworks, not very spectacular, but you were not allowed to walk in this area, and we were explained that this was due to the presence of goblins. And they exist for the people who live there. I spoke to people from Iceland, and they said, yeah, we believe in that, and they live there. And therefore they exist, and therefore we have a commissioner in charge of them, and therefore streets have to be built differently. And in the evening, I ended up believing in them myself. I didn't buy one of these plush goblins, but I was about to. And another translation for goblin is troll. In our world, that's what they tend to be called on the internet. There might be some living trolls as well. Sometimes I think they go too far when it's about personal details, but that's not the point here. The question was, do they exist or not? And I gave you an explanation. Miss Emcke, are you convinced? Yes, I can probably explain the background. I wouldn't have thought that the goblin is particularly likely, but I've never been to Iceland. The background is that there was a text in the New Yorker that impressed me a lot by an author called Catherine Schultz, who wrote about the fact that it's unusual that humans are capable to find animals that they know don't exist more or less likely. And this text has the example of 10 mythical creatures, goblins, zombies, the monster of Loch Ness, Pegasus, and so on. And the task is to take these mythical creatures that we all suspect can't exist and rank them and explain why we find one mythical creature more likely than another impossible creature. And this was a key text for me. It was an important task in thinking about climate questions, because I believe that one of the necessary exercises if we want to survive the climate crisis is not being distracted by the idea that it's impossible or unrealistic, and that we need to work on developing not only dystopias and describing the looming catastrophes, but I would say developing the democratic virtue of thinking in possibilities, and that's why the test was such a good example for me. There's another part of the book that I would like to read, where you write that it's this imaginable space that must be cartographed. It's thinking ahead into the not yet that is needed in the face of the climate crisis. And Ms. Kemfert, when you hear this, what do you think? Because you could argue that we've already mapped all this. People like you and other scientists they know what's looming and why it is looming. And we know what needs to be done, or what could be done. Is it this mapping of the space of possibilities that we need, or is it something else completely? Yes, and we don't know why we're not getting where we need to get, and that's what I like so much about the approach of Carolin Emcke. We need to address where we want to go, and we need to describe it, and we're not succeeding in that well enough. As a scientist, you asked me what I think about this. Well, we've been working with scenarios for decades. I'm a mathematical modeler. We have these hypothetical scenarios. We've been knowing that we're in a climate crisis for 20 years, and for 20 years I've been telling positive stories, but nobody's been listening. And these apocalyptic worlds that we've often imagined haven't got us where we need to be at all. And I know lots of climate researchers who are completely desperate, who've been spending 30 years addressing all this, and the mapping has been done, but in a scientific world and in a scientific description that does exactly not do the things that you do, describing them in the media and in the public sphere, and finding much better words that we as scientists can't find or don't have. And you can only reach people with descriptions, yes, but also feelings, emotions, and thinking spaces. What would be possible? Where can we get? What would a good scenario look like? And what are the positive consequences if we do these things? Not only apocalypses, but also a good world, a city that is quiet, that is calm, that causes fewer emissions. All of these are great things, and still we're not doing them, and that's what comes into my head when you ask a question. We know so many things, and we're still not doing them, and that's where we need to start and question, why did we not succeed in these 30 years that we had, that I had, that others had, to address this? Why didn't we succeed? And it's partly due to the descriptions that you've mentioned, but also due to other points that I would like to talk about later, because I've experienced them myself, that also are one of the reasons why it didn't work. But there's no point. We need to get out of this. We know it's very late and everything is happening far more quickly than we imagined, and that's why we finally need to act. And any and every question answer, I'm gasping for these answers that might be able to show us ways of getting out of this crisis and finally fighting climate change.
I would like to add something to this, to also the question of mapping. And of course it's true, it's completely true that there was all the time there has been modulations, and there's always been scenarios that I think it's I would say the form of thinking in climate scenarios is one of if-then functions, and all the time we learned this in the COVID crisis. When these measures are taken, then in this time frame we will see this result, and if we don't take these measures, then we will see these results. The difficulty with the mapping is that the time frames are very huge. In the pandemic, it was like a couple of weeks or 3 months, 6 months, but that was, I think, the cause and effects relations showed us these cause and effect relations much more in a more drastic way than the climate crisis, and it's a difficulty of the temporality, and there's a silent quite criticism, not in Ms. Kemfert, but the political discourse where we have in the climate discourse and even the climate activist field more, it was rather mapped whether what we do, what would happen if we don't act. And there's good reasons, I understand that this threatening scenario was painted, and now it's already reality that is shown. But I will think we will talk about why aren't we gotten better then? Why haven't we progressed there? And why hasn't more people be mobilized? And one of the possibilities is that this permanent threat scenario is more off-putting. Not only disabling, slowing us down, but it's also possible. I was born in 1967, and large portion of my life I have been destroying my life. A large part of my life I have used practices and habits and convictions that have caused what we are seeing now. And if you're not just being coy about it, if you think about this honestly and without consequences, then it's terrible. And for those who live in the branches, whether in coal or chemistry or steel or whatever, weapons industry, if they really take this seriously and really think about this, that means that they have a life where they were proud of, a life that nourished their families and built up private wealth from which they thought it was a good life. They have to tell themselves this life was interwoven with the guilt of destroying. And this feeling, I'm taking this serious. And this feeling that this is difficult is that to accept this or to and why this causes reactions, defensive reactions. I'm not saying that we should stay there, we'll be nice to them and that's okay, that's it. But if the question is why wasn't it enough, then I believe that you have to talk about these effects, and you have to think about the question whether these narratives don't open. You have to talk about these narratives that might be opening things, liberating things, that is keeping us. That keep us in keeping these systems that have kept us in a fossil system or whatever. That we should strengthen these narratives that say that there's something to win, that liberates us from these systems. It was quite long. There's a large strength that when I question this. That a large portion of society would be able to phrase this and be honest about this, to accept this, that this actually happened. That what Carolin Emcke said, the fewest share, like most people say it can't be that bad. And all this whataboutism and all these narratives and all these narratives of climate change doesn't exist. We know all of these narratives. These are 80%. There were 80% of those people who were born in the 1967, and these narratives and it's a huge strength to be able to reflect yourself and take conclusions, not only for the own acting, but also showing solutions for society. And most discussions in the last 20 years, that wasn't the basis for discussion, and I think exactly the opposite. So you would. You can take this non-acting, the societal non-acting. You can interpret the societal non-acting in two ways. So first is people still haven't understood this, or you're hearing it, but you don't want to accept this. I don't think there's a dissent here. The point is important to me, is that the climate scientists say you have to repeat it and repeat it again. People need to understand it at some point. I think as understanding it at some point, most people are understanding it, even the politics. But the strength that Carolin Emcke just said, is like the ability to act and change things, it doesn't exist because people are sitting on the sofa and reminiscing in old travels, and believing that you're still only responsible for 2% of the emissions because you're as a German. Because why should I change anything? All these excuses that have been invented, so that you don't have to act, as Carolin Emcke just said, but and really make yourself present. What could be? So it helps to talk about climate change as a fact, and there's now a situation in society where exactly this immobilizes it and is too technocratic. And no, I think too many things are coming together. I think we're at a point where only knowledge isn't enough. I think that we're at an urgency where you need to act and we have to operationalize. And there's two things that follow from that. One, there's the operationalizing that often we saw that in heat pumps and other questions. It often goes into technical detail questions, and I'd admit I don't understand this. I don't even want to understand this. I want this to be debated. I want this to be decided, and then I have to just follow these rules, and that's fine. And it should be economically and socially equal and adequate. But from the question of discourse, this operationalization has a difficulty, and it has something to do with the genre of the language in which we have to get, because we have to enact on the things. People are open to these. As someone who's open to these questions, I completely don't understand the technical debates. And I would like to add one point to that. And I would say that the fact that it's not only about the question of whether climate crisis exists, but it's really about the acting. It's really about it's really about the essence. And I'm trying to say what I already tried to say is there's psychological barrier. I wouldn't just discount this as an excuse. I would take this serious because you need to address this. You can't address this otherwise. And beyond this hesitation, to really ask yourself, what haven't we actually done all the time? I don't know. Like maybe some of you know the small text by Leo Tolstoy on the death of Ivan Ilyich, and it's a story about where someone is lying on the deathbed and knows that he would be dying, and suddenly reflects on his life and asks himself whether this was a not good, well-lived life, and can't change anything. And this feeling, and I have this feeling. I thought I did everything right, but like I didn't do this right. And ask yourself, as a society, this is huge and not small at all. But you have to ask yourself where this comes to the essence. There's also extremely hard, concrete economic interests are at play and are standing against this. It's not only the point that the people are hesitating or in this hesitating moment, but there's a huge machinery of influence taking and intentional questioning of media campaign that takes fairly simple political measures and tries to prevent them very actively. And so I think we can map this out, but there's authoritarian regimes, fossil industries who don't want that. And I think that in the last 3 years, we have seen this in a much more intense way. And brutal attacks against persons, defamation campaigns, misinformation campaigns. And you have to also work with this headwind.
Please let me say we didn't get any glasses. I don't want to make you think that Emcke simply drinks from a bottle. It was like this when we came. It doesn't mean that we need glasses. We're fine, unless you want one. No, I just wanted to explain so you don't think what are they doing. You said this one phrase that it's not about explaining anymore, reasoning anymore, whether the climate crisis is real or menacing. But I'm not sure if that's true. That last part you said is hinting at the political attempts to sow doubt. I reported on agrarian politics for some years, and if there is one field where these debates are still being held, then it's agrarian politics. Like, does nitrate really come from excrement, and are emissions really a problem? My impression is that it still exists, and I would like to give that question to Ms. Kemper, who's been thinking a lot about it. Are we at that point, or are we no longer at the point that we need to defend the foundations as true and as realized? Yes, I think we disagree slightly on that point, Ms. Emcke, because you think that society is at a point of hesitancy, and I doubt that, because my experience is that society might get to that point, but it's being dragged away from that forcefully because there are interests at play that are saying climate change is not that bad, and that's where doubt comes into it. There's this whole machinery in the background. I wrote an entire chapter on these merchants of doubt who are trying to sow doubt, very, very targeted doubt. And others have shown how this hangs together from the tobacco lobby all the way to climate change. And there's this machinery in the background, and this to drag people away from this hesitancy to a point where they're told that there is no proof and it's not that bad, and we're only responsible for 2% of emissions, and all these doubts are coming into play, and they're being served by a market. And you have to know that science lives on doubt because there is never automatic certainty. There's also a thesis and an antithesis, but in the case of climate change, there is in fact unity. 98% of scientists are in agreement. I would actually talk about agreement if it was just 80%. We always ask in climate research, would you board a plane that is 80% likely to crash? And certainly not with 98%. How much more certainty do we need? There is agreement for once, but the doubts are coming into play as this small creeping poison that is being given through the media and through PR campaigns. And of course, we have the attention economy where somebody makes a claim and then media always present opinions and counter opinions, which of course science is not an opinion, but there's always this approach where you have to have one position and then a counter position, but there is no counter position to climate change, or the people who are going on stage with their counter positions are being paid for it, and they're still receiving attention. That's particularly obvious in the United States. We in Germany have public service broadcasting, but there too are, and you know this better than I do, there are this is starting to show, and this doubt is being sowed, and that's why we get into this loop where science has to be explained, has to be reasoned. Yes, and I would like to add that there is this genre in the public sphere of for and against, and I would like to avoid anybody who is invited, for example, to a talk show format in this pro and contra, for and against framing, to not participate. We have to stop playing to this framing. We keep being told that there are equally valid opposing positions on all topics, and that's, I'm sorry, bullshit, and we have to stop this. It leads to these situations that are then being talked about as division of society, that are then being picked up by the talk shows who started it in the first place. So any of you that are being invited, and this is for another reason as well, because as soon as Ms. Kemfert is being invited to speak, she is going to think about not only what she thinks on a certain topic, she's not going to just reason it through with herself, but she's always going to be working against the other and arguing against the counterposition. It's a self-inflicted dumbing down. If we need to, so please don't read the stuff. Don't allow yourself to be invited into these kinds of formats. It's really a systematic destruction of reasoned, rational, differentiated discourse. It needs to be abolished. I like being interrupted for that kind of thing, and I think it's very sensible. You made my day. If I can say one more thing, I'm sorry that I'm getting angry about this, but it's really consequential. And as we can already see, Claudia Kemfert and I don't agree on everything, and that means it's not true that people who are being invited might be close to each other in political or social or cultural questions. There's never going to be a consensus. There might be simply more differentiated dissent, and a reasoning where we too may be hesitant or in disagreement, and that's being prevented. Yes, and I'm very glad that you're putting it this way. I and many of my colleagues are really aghast in a time like how the media talked about this during COVID, where Chief Virologist Christian Drosten had to wonder what's happening to me. And it's always been this way in climate science, but he didn't know that, and he'd never had his competency doubted in this way. Like one of the world's leading virologists was being questioned on his knowledge, and I think it's really great what he's been saying. I would try to differentiate a little bit. Of course, that exists, but it's not all there is. You can talk yourself into a rage, but I would like to add the question: the audience might leave this room and spreads the word against the pro and contrafication of the word, but maybe not. And in your writing and thinking about the writing, doubt plays a decisive role. It's a lot about making doubt transparent and allowing yourself to distrust yourself when you don't doubt. But now we've talked about this emergence of doubt, and in a situation where we can't wish for a public for our own public sphere. But of course, we want to. If you want to have an impact, how do you deal with this? Deal with the fact that you make yourself vulnerable if you doubt. Maybe we can gather the answers to those questions. One answer would be, indeed, in fact, self-doubt as a method of enlightenment and self-doubt as a method of science, but also as an ethic, is inevitable to me. And of course, there is reasonable and completely unreasonable doubt. And what Claudia Kemfert mentioned, and I mentioned, these opponents who are generating these machineries of disfigurement. I wouldn't call that reasonable doubt. I would call it slander or defamation. I would use other words than doubt. But we can't do without doubt in the question not only of what's possible, but also when we talk about how we act as a social movement or as humans working for a sustainable change of the world and our society, and I always get nervous with all kinds of movements and groups when they start to harden themselves, when they start developing orthodoxies, when they stop questioning themselves, and not so much in the case of goals, but when it comes to instruments and tactics and means. I think the social movements or the civil justice or emancipation movements that have been successful have always been the ones that kept being irritable and kept being permeable and wondered is it working what we're trying to do? Do we have to change our tactics? Do we have to change the way we speak? And we saw this on the field of climate activism, the uncertainty under this crazy pressure of criminalization and under these defamation campaigns against the lost generation movements, all these all this crazy machinery that's come from the state and from the Springer press. But I always worry when simply because we're being attacked or people are being attacked in this way, they hesitate to ask these internal questions. And I think that we need to, that in these alliances, in these communities, where we have a large consensus on large questions, we have to maintain that doubt. And when we don't maintain that doubt, I don't think we can succeed in reaching a cultural hegemony. You can't really have the ambition to bring about radical change without also remaining dynamic.
I'd agree, totally. I would try and see this, and the science works like this, and if we sorry, I got irritated here. So if where I get like I really don't feel well where the radicalization happens. So where's the radicalization? Where does it happen? I find it highly problematic where you want to where people want to sacrifice their life for the right thing. The means of the protest forums that's irritating me. With the hunger strike, meaning we have to talk. How can we create majorities and see how the politics has happened. So don't you understand this? In this moment, and that's where we, if you look at the, if you see, if you have to accompany someone dying, that is not climate activism. The question is, let's see how we can get the politics to react, and where the activism has its doubts, I would be at the point to say, people, let's find forms of protest where you can win influence. But when someone dies, I think that's I think that's not a good idea. And I ask people to find different ways. Let's try and stay agile and find out how to stay agile in the protest. And that's a difficulty where that I haven't found out yet, but I know ways from science how to address doubts and find ways thinking about agile solutions and communally acting for climate activism. And the more we are, the more ways we can find to be. So Fridays for Future brought so many people to the streets. That is what what gets the politics nervous. Someone, but not someone sacrificing themselves. Please, 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 let's go to the street again and get politics nervous, and not singular kamikaze actions that act against yourself or against your body, and not against society, not for society. For everybody who knows the context, doesn't know the context, there's a splinter group from the last generation who has been going into hunger strike for the last 2 months, and one person is not accepting fluid liquids anymore. Please, and my appeal would be, please, let's have a fairness, and let's try to get there. You could debate a lot about this, and it's the most unreputatable form of protest, but I would like to talk about one other topic that already has been existing. Then that's the utopia, the search for what could be, and you both sort of mentioned that this could be something that is necessary, and I've read this in your book really strongly, and I immediately had the question: is the utopia of one person not the dystopia of another? And would you possibly lose, if you have to imagine what can change societally, a large portion of the society that you need for this transformation on the way, because for them this utopia is a catastrophe? Let's start there. Isn't that a danger, and is it possibly still worth it? The question is, I think it's totally reasonable. But of course, will there be losses in this change? And of course, there will be losses on entire sectors of the economy, entire professions, ways of life will be broken. Some will have to morph into something else, and others not. But I believe that we have all these fractures in other areas as well. Claudia Kemfert can describe this, or Lutz Raphael, the industrial sociologist, can describe this. We have these we have survived these changes and lived through these changes, 70s, 80s for example, and we have survived them much better than England and France. But of course, the question is totally reasonable, and you can't just talk about this over this without thinking about the climate change as a social question. And it's not about climate here and there, the social question, but no, it is a social question. And of course, there will be not only certain groups all over the world will people be have to lose their business model, and some regimes, I'm not sad about this. And that is maybe the second point. Maybe we should also say how much an honor it is for Claudia Kemfert and me to talk to Jonas Scheible about this, who is publishing about these topics tirelessly for quite a while, where the question of democracy is interwoven with this climate change question. And we can only address the climate question where if the democracy as an order doesn't break down in front of our eyes, because without participation and without rights for minorities, it won't happen anyway. And therefore, I'd have a plaidoyer, a plea for Jonas Scheible and his writings. And that is really a dystopia. The real dystopia is that we are authoritarian regimes and right-wing regimes, fascistic regimes, are threatening us double. And therefore, I'm relaxed, if you want, because we have the better concept. I'm saying we have the better concept, and the better concept is democracy, and therefore this threat of the dystopian I would see with the enemies of change or the opponents of change, and not those who are imagining the change. I'd completely contradict you there. The great book by Jonas Scheible, of course, and I really think that's great. But I don't have this relaxation. I have, because I've got 20 years of discourse behind me that was against this. All these aggressive tones against climate protection. We would be so much further down the road if we hadn't had this discussion. These targeted merchants of doubts that we, with all these attention economy and the trolls and everything that we have now, that they're trying to deny the climate change and getting us to a point I find absolutely dangerous. And of course we have the better model, but I'm not relaxed about this at all. But this aggressiveness of these autocracies that have more money, that bring us apart, that disturb us, that sow doubt in science, and they're using our democratic process and preventing us to do climate protection. I'm just not negatively at all. I'm generally positive, and I'm certainly not relaxed. But I want to continue this talk. I'm not relaxed when it comes to because it's already too late. We have to do climate protection, and we're getting caught up again with these debates, and we have to do things. Totally okay. What's wrong with?
I might have expressed myself badly. The question, as I understood it, was is it not problematic that the thing that we are selling as a utopia is in fact a dystopia? And I was trying to say, no, the dystopia is what's being given to us by authoritarian regimes. And I meant that in a normative sense. I'm not going to sit back, relax, and not do anything. I meant that in a normative sense. Normatively, I'm convinced that democracy, as incomplete as it might be, something that we need to permanently adjust and deepen. But to answer the question, is it not dystopian? Aren't you taking something away from people? I would say no. We're currently trying to, firstly, rescue democracy and, secondly, solve climate change. And I'm relaxed in the sense that I know what we are promising is not only what allows us to survive, but also the thing that can be filled with substantially with good life. And that's a conviction that you have to have. You can't just say we want to prevent the apocalypse, but you have to add we also want a freer, better, more socially equitable life. I completely agree with you. Thank you for explaining that. But I would like to go back to one point. That's the social question, and it's very important. Climate change is completely social. It's a social topic. The poor countries are suffering the most. Poor households are suffering the most. They can't afford to simply move away from all the emissions. They have all the negative consequences, but they also have higher costs because the climate change is going to cost a lot of money, and the richer households can afford to pay it, but the poor people are suffering and money is being taken away from them. Look at the energy crisis. The poorer households are suffering the most. And it's the same for the climate crisis. So everything we're doing about climate change is very much a social question, and it has to be about that first and foremost. And that's why we're not going anywhere, because the privileged people don't want to move away one iota from their privileges, and that's why we are not making any progress. And not only that, it's not only privileged people. You can also, it's also the countries that are attached to fossil fuels, and there are huge lobby interests at play in the background that are also preventing any kind of progress. And yes, structural change has always existed, and we've done a lot of studies on that, and it's going to continue existing, and the change is already happening. But now we need to prevent these changes from drifting towards a dystopia and push them in a positive direction, and help everyone, especially households that can't call any shots. That's where we need to start. That's where we need to start tweaking, and we can do that. And that gets us on a way where we need to be to prevent the worst effects of climate change. I'm going to take that as the closing remark because our 1 hour is over. Thank you, Carolin Emcke and Claudia Kemfert. Thank you also, Jonas Scheibler. And thank you, everyone.